Well, that was Paul Mason. Now this, as David Attenborough could have told you, is a civet cat, or so our graphics department imagines. It's perhaps best known for secreting the musk used in expensive perfumes and for pooing undigested coffee beans, which are said to make a sensational morning kickstart. But if you're an economist, a business person or a banker, civets is increasingly used as an acronym for some of the economies of the future. The next China is Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt, Turkey or South Africa. The acronym is less agile than the animal, but Joe Lynham likes it a lot more.
Whereas a brick is a strong and robust object, a civet is a rather meek little mammal whose odour is used to make perfume, believe it or not. It's the smell of money, though, that has made the civets acronym more famous than its animal namesake. Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt, Turkey and South Africa have all been collectively touted as the next wave of emerging economies which could, and we must stress the conditional here, match their brick brothers in terms of growth but not scale. But what on earth could unite one South American, 2 African and 3 Asian countries separated by vast distances as well as historical and financial backgrounds? Well, they all have young, educated populations. 28 is the median age. In Britain, it's 40, and for Germany, Italy and Japan, it's a more elderly 44. Youth, and especially a trained one, matters in a growing economy because it means you're producing a stream of wealth creators, or at least consumers of goods and services. And the other unifying factor for civets is growth itself. Land and labour are cheap, and as a result, they've all grown rapidly by our standards over the past few years. And it's this combination of growth and youth that has led to a boom in foreign direct investment into those countries.
It's who do we look to next? Who are the other economies that share the characteristics of a very low level of development, but really good foundations, really good fundamentals, so they're going to grow rapidly in the next few years, that have the potential, we think, to grow rapidly, not just for a few years, but for a few decades ahead. Certainly by far outpacing the rates of growth that we're going to be seeing here in the Western world.
We could look at all 6 civets, but to save time, let's only look at 3. Colombia has come a long way from being a byword for kidnapping and cocaine. The civil war with FARC guerrillas has fizzled out, and Colombia's main export now is oil and coffee, 2 commodities which have soared in price of late. The Colombians have worked hard to improve their corporate governance, and that's paying off. Growth is averaging between 5% and 6% every year, and American firms alone invested $7 billion there in 2010. At the geographical apex of Europe, Asia and Africa, Turkey has long promised but is only now delivering. Check where your shirt was made, chances are it's from Turkey, and so too might be your washing machine. Turkey also makes cars, 1.1 million of them in 2010, in joint ventures with global brands such as Fiat and Toyota. The World Bank thinks it'll grow by over 5% this year.
Turkey is a classic example of a country that had some very serious crises in the past, and as soon ago as sort of 10 years ago, but has come through that, and now has very credible policy, very credible fiscal and economic policy, and is very actively attracting investment and boosting growth as a result of that. And the other interesting one is Indonesia, still a country that has an awful lot of development to do. It's still very split in terms of, part of it's very wealthy and other parts of it very poor. But again, a country that has huge potential going forward, particularly in the region in Asia, linked to China and India, both on its doorstep.
And David Cameron was on that doorstep this week. Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world and with an economic potential to match. Like its neighbours in Australia, it's made hay on the back of an abundance of commodities, especially tin and natural gas. In fact, it's the 11th largest gas producer in the world, and its young, mostly secular population has also acquired a taste for shopping.
However attractive the civets group of nations are, they're still a very risky bet. Most of the 6 countries aren't even considered investment grade by the credit ratings agency. And doing business there is not straightforward. Democracy and accountability is new if it exists at all. Company law is sketchy, and punishments for what we consider minor infringements can be draconian in some places.
Then there's the omnipotent threat of civil unrest or even outright war. A year after Egypt was included in the civets list, it had a major revolution and investment dried up entirely for 6 months. No one can say for sure that such events won't ever happen again elsewhere. So, if ever caveat emptor applied, it's to the civets.
Well, here to explain more about these civets is the Colombian ambassador, Mauricio Rodriguez, and Wolfgango Piccoli, a risk consultant at the Eurasia Group. Is this anything more than some gimmicky acronym, do you think, Ambassador?
I think this concept has a lot of substance. This was created by the Economist Intelligence Unit after a thorough analysis of the macroeconomic fundamentals and political and social variables. So I think it has a lot of potential, and the facts, the recent history, proves that the Economist is right in forecasting a high growth rate for our economies.
Sure, but what do you have in common with Egypt?
We have a large population, young population. We
Sure.
have a...
They had a growth rate of less than 1% last year, didn't they? 2% predicted for this year.
The IMF forecasts a growth rate between 4 and 6% for the coming 3 years in Egypt. And I agree that there's the potential for that kind of growth rate.
What do you make of this idea?
I'm a bit more skeptical. I certainly share the view that some of this country, most of this country, they share a favorable growth outlook, but the acronym in itself are much more on the gimmick side for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's unclear to me what are really the commonalities among these countries. Moving from Indonesia, 240 million, to Colombia, 46 million. A country with a 1 trillion GDP in Indonesia, Colombia shy of 300 billion. First. Second, why Egypt is in this group? The growth outlook for Egypt is not certainly that favorable. And the assumption that Egypt has got good fundamentals is certainly questionable.
we could also ask why some countries aren't in this group. Absolutely. Why isn't Mexico in there? Why isn't Malaysia in there, for example?
Well, I agree that Mexico should be included. Maybe we should be called Simbets.
Well, maybe it's just a little more difficult to get some gimmicky acronym if you start putting in too many countries.
No, but I agree. You know, it's always difficult to choose which countries to put in, which countries to leave out of these categories. But I agree that Mexico should be included. It has a huge population, a very large GDP, and it has solid institutions. And I hope that they will continue doing well in economic terms.
Do you have any plans for a civets convention or a civets group or something? You do?
Absolutely.
You're going to start trying to act as a group?
Yes, we have been talking to the presidents or prime ministers of these countries. Our finance ministers are working together in defining strategies to...
What will you hope to do?
Well, we hope to have common plans to promote investment in our countries, both domestic and foreign investment. For example, in Colombia, foreign investment has multiplied by 10 in the past 10 years.
Would you invest in these countries?
Well, certainly in some of them. I mean, I think Indonesia, countries like Indonesia, countries like Turkey, South Africa, Vietnam, they do enjoy a favorable economic outlook. There is no doubt about that. The question is, once you put them in the same basket, then you have to make the case for that. And the case, in my view, is a fairly weak case. Leaving aside the idea of creating a fancy acronym, the fundamentals there are not there. And the question is why Mexico is not there and why Egypt is in the group.
Right. You may say that they suffer from a silly name, perhaps. You can make all sorts of accusations, but what you can't argue with is their rate of growth. You look at the rate of growth in this country, less than 1%, the rate of growth across Europe, and you compare it with these countries, they're going places, we're not.
Absolutely. There is no question about that. They all share, as I was saying in the very beginning, a very favorable economic outlook. There is no dispute about that. But there are these significant challenges, even for a country like Colombia, which has done very well over the past few years, with a significant intake of FDI. There is a challenge there. There is a challenge of how you manage all this new wealth. What does it mean in terms of controlling inflation? What does it mean in terms of controlling the rate of exchange and so on? There is a challenge there. Growth is certainly good, but it comes with challenges.